10 years ago I was hospitalized in a clinic. My first baby had just been born and we were hospitalized for 3 days. During those 3 days, when I slept, I felt 3 people approaching my bed and standing next to me. One of those presences was very hostile and came very close to my face, saying strange things. I don't remember what he was saying right now. The other 2 figures just stood there staring. When I woke up, those presences were no longer there. We thank Liliana de Jesus Alvarez for sharing this story with us. Without a doubt, the Mexican Institute of Social Security, better known simply as the IMSS, keeps among its corridors quite a few very interesting and also macabre stories. In this video we will tell you some of them. So get comfortable and turn off the light, because these are 9 scary stories that happened in the IMSS. How are you? Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Greetings to your friend Nightcrawler and his friend Masked Man. Welcome to Mundo Creepy. Let's get started. I'm from Parral, Chihuahua, and I also work at the IMSS. In that hospital, not only the child they mentioned in the previous video of this topic appears, that is, Carlitos or Miguelito, as some call him, but also a nurse who died several years ago, which, it is said, took her life for a love sickness. In fact, the clinic is already somewhat old, so it is understandable that some things appear there. That without counting all the people who die inside, especially those who died in the pandemic, which I think gives for one or another story more. And although, despite the fact that I have been on guard at night, something strange has never happened to me personally, thank God. Although my grandfather did. In 2019 he was hospitalized, being cared for by my father. One day when my father came to see him, my grandfather asked him who was the tall shadow that was next to him, and asked him to take him out, although obviously there was no one there. In fact, that day my grandfather did not let his roommate sleep, and the next day he repeated over and over again that he already wanted to leave the hospital. Unfortunately, a couple of days later, my grandfather died. Thank you for giving us a space in your video. I have really been following you for a long time, a greeting and may God bless you. Sometimes the souls or ghosts of some workers usually appear, as if the spirits were going to say goodbye to their workplace. That's what my mom told me, since she worked for almost 30 years at the clinic, and spent her last years on the night shift. She had to live several experiences, from those of a paranormal type, like those rather sad, like losing several of her colleagues before they could retire. She said that sometimes they could see them days after they died, walking down the corridors of the hospital to say goodbye. The most recent story that a friend of my mom told us, who is still working there, is that another nurse who was a friend of both appeared to them, and that apparently, he went to say goodbye, since unfortunately he had died recently, when he was on his way to the hospital. He says that a new nurse appeared to him on the night shift, who had been working for a short time. That nurse said that she saw a woman, whom she had not seen throughout the shift, and thought she was from another floor, since she suddenly appeared to him on the stairs. She said that this other nurse she spoke to was very kind, and that she even had a certain accent that characterized her when speaking. In addition, she spoke with great affection of her work, and also tells the girl that other nurse left several of her patients in charge. Incidentally, she also told her that she saw such co-workers, which she even mentioned by name, greet her on her behalf, and tell them that she was fine, and then lose her sight. So it went on for a while, and this new girl ran into my mom's friend, who told us all this, and told her what had just happened. My mother's friend says that at that moment, she only fainted and felt a chill, because she knew that it was impossible that such and such was out there, since she had died days ago, and had even attended her funeral. My mother's friend asked the new girl more questions, and this one even gave her physical characteristics of the nurse she had seen, and everything coincided with the deceased. So to this day, my mother and her friends, take it as if the spirit of her partner, left to say goodbye to her work, and also to them. About 6 months ago, my father was hospitalized in the Institut Itlan, for heart issues. However, due to a bad praxis, he developed a kidney damage, and a doctor came in to examine the sick at 2 a.m. It should be mentioned that in that room, there were only two patients, my father and an elderly man. When he reviewed the files, he began to scold the doctors, although he never told us his name, and in fact, we didn't see his face clearly either. I say all this in the plural, because I also talked about this with the person who took care of the other patient, and we both agree on what we saw. Before leaving, the doctor, very angry, yelled at them that they hadn't done their job well, and that because of him, my father had to be dialyzed. Later I went out to look for him, but I never saw him. I reviewed the file to know the name, and there was only one signature. We asked the nurses, but nobody knew him, nor did they know that the doctor had gone on the tour, since that was not his schedule. The doctors to whom he scolded said they hadn't seen him before either, since they were only passers-by, and they had little time to have entered. It should be mentioned that we looked for him in the shelves where the photos of the doctors are shown, and we didn't see anyone with his appearance, because maybe we could recognize him, at least by his hair. The lady who was taking care of the other patient and I remembered her voice very well, but so far, although we meet from time to time in the hospital, due to the patient's revisions, we can't recognize him or talk to that doctor to thank him. I tell you all this with some suspense, but not fear, because the truth is that thanks to that doctor, my father is now at home and stable. Oh, IMSS, many things happened there. Personally, my mom was hospitalized for 3 weeks for a knee operation. On the second night, I took care of her. I was lying on the floor and I ran the curtains by the light. I was about to fall asleep when under those curtains I saw a child's feet running. Then I got up. I looked around, but there was no one there. I went to the nurse's station and there was no one there either. I looked around the room where they eat and there they were. They asked me if I needed anything and I just asked them if there were children on that floor, to which they replied that no, because on that floor only adults were attended. I just saw a child's feet running inside the room, I told them, and they replied that that always happens on that floor. That's why they go to a specific time to eat together and have coffee, because they are afraid. I couldn't sleep after that, but I did have a bad time during the 2 weeks that my mother was hospitalized. No one could tell me who that child was. That place is really scary. If you're liking this video, don't forget to leave your like, we upload 3 videos a week. So subscribe and activate the bell to be one more inhabitant of this creepy world. I worked at an IMSS clinic. In fact, I worked in several because they rotated us. I was a security guard. In one of those clinics, a colleague had died who loved his job very much. He spent 5 years there and they never rotated him. Unfortunately, he had kidney disease and shortly after starting his dialysis, he died from complications of his disease. I came to that clinic to take his place and I was always very comfortable in my job. I never noticed anything strange, until one day when my colleague turned 10 days old. I was with another colleague talking about him. I didn't know the deceased, but my colleague did. He told me how good and friendly he was and how he still couldn't believe that he had died. It is worth mentioning that we were already alone because it is a family unit that closes at 7 p.m. We were there when suddenly in the employees' dining room it was heard as if they were moving frets and dragging the chairs. Neither of them dared to go until after a while. Obviously, when we went to see, everything was in its place and we both looked at each other as if asking what had happened. Immediately, my colleague said, "Surely it was on the street," and I answered him, "It was inside, it wasn't on the street." In fact, they say that after 10 days the dead say goodbye to the places they met. Maybe. My colleague interrupted me and said, "Maybe nothing, don't be stupid, those things don't exist." But I know what I heard and I'm sure that the deceased colleague went to say goodbye to his workplace, the one he loved so much. My aunt works at the IMSS and she has told us some experiences that she has had there, but the one I remember the most was to know a doctor who worked in the same hospital as her, who got sick or had an accident. I don't remember well, but the fact is that he was hospitalized and unfortunately died a few days later. It was very sad because he was a very kind doctor and he always greeted her and her coworkers. The paranormal happened the next day, My aunt and her friend were walking down a corridor when suddenly this doctor appeared to them walking. He looked at them for a moment, smiled at them and greeted them with his hand as he always did, just to disappear entering one of the rooms of the corridor. My aunt says that when she turned to see her colleague to make sure that she had not been the only one who had seen him, she was completely pale and shouted to my aunt to leave that place. I think this cannot be considered as paranormal, but my grandmother told me a very interesting anecdote. She worked in the gynecological unit at the General Hospital of Mexico City and has several strange stories from there, but I am very struck by the attention that she told me that when the earthquake of 1985 occurred, my mother received a school report, so they sent to call my grandmother and she warned that she would arrive late to work and that she would take my mother with her. My grandmother was one of those people who never missed work or the guards, however, that day she had to do it. She tells me that they left school and came in the bus, but just before reaching the General Hospital, the earthquake began. The General Hospital, for those who do not know, was one of the most damaged, and specifically in the gynecological unit, there were many people who lost their lives. If it had not been for that day, my grandmother would have had to be inside and my mother be in school. Now that I heard about the General Hospital of Tacuba, that's where my son was born in 2005, for health reasons, because my son was born prematurely, he remained in the ICU and while I was on the floor, they gave me food that made me intoxicated, so I started to feel very bad. During all that night I was very worried and in fact, at dawn, an advanced age nurse entered the room where I was and offered me a large apple, very beautiful in sight and red. I ate that apple while we were talking and she gave me courage to recover and told me that everything would be fine, that my baby would get through. After finishing eating the apple, I thanked her and she said goodbye very kindly. She left and I fell asleep. The next morning the doctor arrived and I told her about the apple, to which she called all the nurses asking who had given me an apple, to which I told her that it had not been any of them and I explained to them how the nurse I had seen was. When they searched the heart of the apple, they found nothing and then I saw how the nurses began to murmur between them and they told me that that nurse I had seen sometimes appears to help patients who are very ill. I don't know who it is, but from the bottom of my heart I thank her for her help and words of encouragement. This story is not mine, it was the experience of a girl I met 11 years ago. She studied to be a nurse and when they sent her to do her practices, they sent her to a hospital in Santa Marta or in the metro to Catitla, I don't remember very well, as it was supposed, they gave her the night shift in emergencies. She told us that one day they took a boy they had found on the street, very malnourished and pale, in fact, he had been taken by people who were passing by the place where he was lying. They attended the boy and this girl had to attend the doctor who was checking him. She says that the poor man had marks on his wrists and feet and it seemed that they had been torturing him. Of the wounds he had, which were many, most were infected, but the worst of all was the one he had on his head, which smelled very bad and was deep and it was also full of worms. She had to heal those wounds and remove the worms. After a few days, when it was her turn and she went to see the boy, they told her that he was no longer there. They told her that a very elegant man had arrived with bodyguards and great security and they had taken him away, even though the boy was still not reacting well. Her file was given to this man and it was only speculated among the employees that the boy was kidnapped and that when they found him, maybe someone had already paid for his rescue. Remember to stay until the end of the video because we have an extra story for you or the pylon of this video. I would say that hospitals in general have many, many stories. We already saw it in the video of the most haunted hospitals in Mexico, but without a doubt the IMSS has this part quite rooted in Mexicans. I think it is the health service most used by the general population. Many things happen, strange things happen, I had to go as a patient, I also had to go doing practices and they always told you or there was no shortage of those who told you a story that a child appeared here, a girl appeared here, an old man and it is quite strange as part of Mexican folklore to talk about the IMSS and to talk about both good and bad things and in this case even paranormal. There leave us your story below if you also have a story of the IMSS, it can also be of negligence because if many left us in the past video, it has fame for that, but hey, let's not get into that. There are also very cool people, well prepared, that we send a greeting to the good doctors and good nurses there. She thought that maybe my grandmother had hired her to take good care of her since she had had complications during and after the birth. It was not until the nurse approached and wanted to snatch my brother from her arms my mother screamed and cried, but apparently no one listened to her until at one point or another my grandmother entered the room and saw her sweating cold there. The nurse disappeared. We never saw her again, and much less did we know why to want to take my brother. That's pretty weird, because at first I thought it was a story about this theft of children that happens. I thought first that it was going to be a story about the ironing. Oh well, of course, yes. Or this type of disease. I mean, I thought the nurse was like a living person who wanted to take a baby. That has happened, unfortunately. Yes.